I'd like to introduce Cole Owen. He's with Clearwater River Watershed District, and the topic he's going to be talking about targeted fertilizer application reduction. Can we sit down and get started, please? The program that he's going to talk about won an award from the Watershed District Associations in December at our annual meeting, and hope you enjoy this presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Jill. My name's Cole Owen. I'm with the Clearwater River Watershed District, and I apologize, I wasn't planning on having a mic, my notes, and a little doohickey to control the presentation, so I'm going to be looking down a lot as I'm flipping through stuff, so I just want to apologize before we begin. The project I'm going to be talking about is the Targeted Fertilizer Application Reduction Project. My presentation has 6 categories. First, we'll be giving a background of the Watershed District, why it was established, the problems it's trying to address. We'll get a little deeper into the problem, which in our case is nutrient impairment for several high-quality recreational lakes. We'll describe the program in more detail, trying to answer the who, what, where, why, how questions. Some findings and surprises from implementation of the program so far. What's next? The program's about 3/4 of the way complete, and then I'll hopefully have some time at the end to answer any questions. So back in the 1960s and 1970s, the folks that enjoyed the waters of the Clearwater River chain of lakes noticed there was a decline in water quality. They actually took some of their own money to do some research, and they discovered that phosphorus was entering the Clearwater River chain of lakes at a rate twice what would be considered damaging. And in effect, the lakes were aging much more quickly before their time. So after doing some legal research, having discussions, public meetings, they petitioned the Minnesota, I believe it was called at that time, Water Resources Board, now it's the Board of Water and Soil Resources, to establish the district to promote, protect, and preserve the water resources. And this was done back in 1975. The first major project that the district undertook is what we call the Clearwater River Chain of Lakes Restoration Project. This was done in the 1980s. The point of the project was to deal with point and non-point sources. For example, of a non-point source that project addressed, there was a creamery near Watkins, Minnesota that was pumping a very large amount of phosphorus into a wetland. That wetland had a direct connection to the Clearwater River via a drainage ditch. So work was done to put a berm around that wetland and basically disconnect it from the rest of the system. That was saving, even now I believe it's still saving 10 to 20,000 pounds of phosphorus per year from entering the Clearwater River. Other work that was done was to assist producers in that area switching from traditional forms of tillage to no-till, strip-till, things of that nature. That project was very successful. However, back in the 2000s, between 2003 and 2010, the district undertook its total maximum daily load studies, and it was determined that to meet the goals that the TMDL told needed to be done, we needed at least 80% or more load reductions from the watershed landscape. So at the end of 2010 and 2009 is about the time those TMDLs were completed, the district found itself asking a very interesting question. We've done all this great work, but we still got quite a ways to go. So how do we address these watershed sources? And what's interesting about this is when you look at the watershed district on the maps up here, you can see that from the southern portion and western portion heading east and north, the land changes from predominantly row crop agricultural production to much more mixed land use. The green would be soybean fields and the gold would be corn fields. And what's interesting about that is that's actually very similar to the way the state is kind of laid out. Going from the southwest to the northeast, you move from predominantly row crop agricultural production to more mixed use to more forest. So how the district addresses this question of how do we deal with these non-point sources from the watershed not only matters to the watershed district, it matters to the state as well. So the district has several water bodies listed as impaired due to excessive phosphorus, and on the map that would be the areas that are in green. So you got Lake Augusta, Caroline, Louisa Marie. We're going to be focusing on Lake Betsy in particular. And the reason for that is that this system is riverian in nature. So everything that happens in the upper portion of the watershed is going to flow downstream and affect all those high quality recreational lakes. So in our case, we are particularly interested in this area in purple. That would be what we call the Lake Betsy subwatershed. In order to meet the Team Deal goals in this area, we're talking at least 12,000 pounds of annual phosphorus reduction from that area. This is a phosphorus budget that kind of shows a layout of the various sources that are contributing phosphorus to Lake Betsy. And in this case, between its direct watershed and then the watershed from its upstream lakes, it's that 12,000 pound figure. This chart shows total phosphorus concentrations in Lake Betsy way back starting in 1981. You can see that we had a very marked decline from 1981 to 1987. That's largely due to that project I spoke of earlier, the Clearwater River Chain of Lakes Restoration Project. However, when we did our TMDL study, which was from the period 1998 to 2007, we found that we were still having very high phosphorus concentrations in Lake Betsy. Even in the last 10, 5, or 3 years, while we're getting much closer to that goal, which is the red line on this graph, 60 micrograms per liter, we're still pretty significantly above that. So in the upper watershed, 70% of the land is used for row crop production. It is the dominant land use. Most of these fields, before this program was initiated, used a standard fertilizer application. That results in a general uniform rate of approximately 150 to 300 pounds per acre of phosphorus fertilizer applied across the whole field. The uniform rate oftentimes results in too much or too little fertilizer being applied. Because of this, the district recognized a unique opportunity to optimize fertilizer application across the field, and by doing so, we felt that water quality could be improved while at the same time improving producers' yields and helping them control their input costs, in this case, their cost of fertilizer. So why would we do this? Why would we care about optimizing fertilizer application? Well, as you can see from this map, the amount of phosphorus present in the soils of the district varies greatly. The green range would be 0 to 5 parts per million, lighter green 5 to 10, and so on and so forth. The hot spots would be the oranges and reds, which we're talking anywhere from 100 to 270 parts per million. A general way to convert that, so it makes a little more sense, would be times it by a factor of 2, and that will put it in basically pounds per acre. So we're talking in the hot spots, there could be easily 500 pounds per acre of phosphorus already present in the soils. Even looking down to the individual field level, that variability still continues. This is just one example. Again, the ranges are the same. This variability is a problem for both the producer and it's a problem for water quality. For the producer, if you're using a standard application rate, you could be over-applying in some areas and under-applying in others. You're basically wasting money and you're not necessarily getting the best yield out of your field. For water quality, fields that have high phosphorus concentrations are more likely to shed that phosphorus during a rain event, and if it continues to get over-applied year after year, it continues to remain high, and it'll just keep shedding over and over. Obviously, there's other factors that determine that. That's just kind of a general statement. So what we did is we came up with this project, and the goal of the project is really 3 things. One, we wanted to accelerate the adoption of gridded soil testing and variable rate application technology to optimize fertilizer application. We also wanted to demonstrate the effectiveness of delivering the program via the local farmer cooperatives. And then we, at the end of the project, which we still have yet to do, we want to develop materials to assist other groups with implementing this program or a program like it in their area. So the program has 6 steps. The first is we work with the local cooperatives to set up an enrollment process. Our goal in this project is 16,000 acres. Then the cooperative goes out and actually recruits the participants. They're the ones that talk with the farmers. The cooperative then performs the gridded soil testing and the variable rate application, and the costs are shown on the slide. The cooperative, once that work is done, submits the data from these activities to the district. Once we get the data and verify the work has been done, we then pay the cooperative. Instead of the cooperative sending the invoice to the producer, they send the invoice to us for the work. We verify it, we pay it. Once we have that data, we also begin to analyze the data, in this case soil testing, fertilizer application. We're also doing some background water quality work at the same time to determine the overall program effectiveness. This map shows the results of using a variable rate application based on soil testing. Compared to that map I showed a few slides ago, you can see that there's an inverse relationship. The greens on this one are 0 to 100 pounds per acre being applied. Oranges are 100 to 230. Red is 230 to 350. And so what's interesting is where there was high concentrations already present, now a lower amount of fertilizer is being applied instead of that standard rate, which just would have been a uniform across the whole field. And where there was low concentrations, a higher amount of fertilizer is now being applied. So the goal is to enroll 54% of the total cropland in the upper watershed. And so far, we are at approximately 80% of that goal. And we just enrolled, I believe we just enrolled about another 7,000 acres this past year. To enroll, both the cooperatives and the producers must sign agreements with the district that kind of lay out, here's what we're gonna do, here's what you're gonna do. One important thing that these agreements cover is the sharing of the data collected from the soil testing and the fertilizer application. The district agreed not to share any of this data on an individual level. Rather, all data is viewed on an aggregate. That's why most of these maps are blown out. This was very important to the producers due to data privacy concerns. There's a genuine concern amongst many producers about what is the government doing with the data that you are collecting, even about soil testing and fertilizer application. So we agreed that we wouldn't share that data so it could pinpoint an individual producer. We will instead consolidate it all into one report and look at it from a 10,000 foot level instead of a 1,000 foot level. So the program began in 2009 as a pilot. The purpose was to determine whether the program would actually result in a significant reduction in applied fertilizer. The pilot actually demonstrated a 25-ton fertilizer reduction over a 1,500 acre area at a healthy return of $100 to $400 of a pound per pound of phosphorus removed from the system. That's generally how we measure in terms of determining what projects we're going to do. We measure, okay, how much is it actually removing phosphorus from the system so it's not mobilizing and going downstream. Because of this good result, the district applied for and received a federal Section 319 grant to expand the program to 16,000 acres. So far, 13,000 have been enrolled. Of this data so far that we've collected, I believe we only have 55%. We just got some more, but we haven't had the time to analyze it yet. 46-ton reduction in fertilizer applied to sensitive areas. And what we mean by sensitive areas, we're talking about lowlands. We're talking about the areas near tile intakes, the areas near the streams and the ditches, the spots where you're most likely going to have phosphorus mobilized during a rain event because they're the closest to the source we're trying to protect, in this case, ditches and streams. But however, we saw overall, across all the fields, a 4-ton increase in fertilizer. What that means is the areas that are most likely to shed the phosphorus are getting less phosphorus now, but the rest of the field is getting more of the phosphorus it actually needs for that crop. In this case, it's predominantly corn and soybeans. I just wanted to share a couple key responses from the stakeholders in this project so far. What we found that the cooperatives that we're working with, if they didn't have the equipment, they have it now, and they see this as an opportunity to open a new revenue stream. We were talking a little bit earlier about smaller producers don't necessarily have the equipment. They can work with their cooperative to do these things. And the cooperative sees it as an additional way to sell products to this constituent they already have. Producers see this program as a way to improve their yields and have better input control. It's promoting optimizing fertilizer application as just another tool in the producer's toolbox. And then the district sees this program as a way to reduce our administrative burden. Working with a private vendor, in this case the cooperatives, takes some of the workload off of district staff. In the case of this project, we're talking about the promotion and the sale of the program, and we're also talking about the actual field work. So in order for a program this size to succeed, we have to overcome some barriers right away at the beginning. One of that is we need to develop a standard process. And that standard process has to be modifiable over time. Things change. For example, we had some producers that were very concerned that we could potentially be pulling water quality data from their tiles. So concerned they weren't going to enroll in the program. So we made an exception for them because they were controlling a very large number of fields that we really wanted enrolled in the program, because we knew at the very least changing the application rate was going to have a benefit, even if we couldn't necessarily quantify it very well. We are also concerned that we want to make sure that the program runs smoothly and we're not really adding a lot to the workload of the cooperative. The cooperative is a business. They have other things they're selling besides this program. We don't want to make it too onerous for them to work with us. Another barrier that we had to work to overcome, and it's been discussed earlier, was a genuine lack of trust between the producer and the government unit, in the case of the district. I mentioned that creamery earlier. The district was involved in trying to correct that problem. That creamery eventually closed. And part of the reason it closed was there was a lawsuit over it, contributing so much phosphorus downstream, and they couldn't afford to upgrade their equipment. The district was involved in that litigation. We didn't actually, back in the 80s, we didn't actually sue the creamery. We sued the state because they weren't addressing the problem. There's still a lot of angst in the area about that. A lot of people will remember and say the district is the one that closed the creamery, so they don't necessarily trust us. We've made a lot of improvements over 30 years, but that trust still isn't there. But by using the cooperative and working with them to deliver the program, the producer is working with an entity he or she already knows. They already trust. They already have a relationship established with them. Another barrier we had was a lack of staff. Many local government units have a fairly small staff. The district is no exception. So by working with the cooperative to deliver the program, we're shifting workload off of us, and the cooperative is taking it on themselves. And again, it's for their own benefit. They recognize this as a revenue source for them. So I don't have to go out necessarily to all these individual producers or landowners and then find out who their renters are and then go talk to them. The cooperative is doing that. So it's taking off all that workload, and they're the ones also doing the field work. I don't have to find someone to do it. They already have the equipment. They're the ones doing it. Another barrier is a barrier of language. Agriculture is its own industry. It has its own jargon. It has its own vernacular. Whereas LGUs that work on water quality, a lot of times we're speaking a different language, and we can have problems when we're talking to one another because we're not picking up on that. So working with the cooperatives provides a middle ground, so both groups can work together better. It also provides an opportunity for the local government unit to learn more about agriculture. We have gained a better understanding about the goals of these individual producers through the eyes of the cooperative. What are they struggling with? What are they thinking about? What's the next thing? What would they like more from us? And we're looking forward to that relationship continuing into the future as we want to deliver more of these programs through the cooperative model. Another barrier is data privacy. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Just as there's concern with data privacy in finance, or there's concerns about data privacy in healthcare, there's concerns in agriculture as well. Producers are concerned. They don't know what we're using the data for. We're not sure. They're not sure where it's going to go. Hands are going to get on it. And are you guys going to come back in 3 to 4 years and suddenly tell me I'm doing something wrong and you're going to make me change? There's a lot. It kind of feeds into that lack of trust. So we still need the data, though, for the program in order to demonstrate it's actually working. So we had to be very clear up front what the requirement was, and we had to communicate very clearly so everyone knows what and how is being collected, how we're sharing it, and that's part of the reason we had the cooperatives and the producers sign that agreement that I mentioned earlier. The last barrier I want to touch on is, does the benefit exceed the costs? The program has to appeal not just to the district in terms of cost per pound of phosphorus removed, it's got to appeal to the producer, otherwise it won't work. It appeals to the producer's bottom line because we're talking about targeting the fertilizer on your field that should result in overall yields going up. We're also talking about a better control on your inputs. If you have a field that's very high in phosphorus and you're using the standard blanket rate, you're throwing money away because that fertilizer probably isn't needed. Whereas if you're a very low concentration and you're using the standard rate, you probably need to be putting more fertilizer down to increase your yield. So there's a good return for the producer. There's also a good return for the district as well. That's why we did that pilot project that I mentioned earlier before we kicked it into high gear, to make sure that we were going to see a good return. So some next steps. The program is in year 4 of 5 of its full 5-year run. We're not sure what's the next step after that, but first we want to make sure we get all these things done. We want to review and process the data. That will help us determine the program's overall effectiveness and whether the goals have been met. We want to complete collection and the water quality, collection of the water quality data that we've been collecting. We need to process it. What we're actually doing is we're pulling various samples throughout that entire upper watershed from the streams and ditches, trying to provide a good baseline background. So as this changes in the landscape and we still have these heavy rain events, we should see those pulses of phosphorus that were coming through the past 4 or 5 years, they should start to lessen because there's less fertilizer on the fields. So that's why we're doing that type of data collection. We also want to create send and then process surveys to the enrolled producers. We're focusing on 2 questions when we're doing that. We want to see how much of the technology the producer actually understands, and we want to ask them, are you planning on continuing to use this into the future, or is this something you don't feel is worthwhile? If producers don't feel it's worthwhile, we certainly don't want to continue funding it. We want to be working with producers to improve the way they manage their land. Then we need to publish the final program report, and we want to create handouts for both producers and government units. We're going to gear these so that they're usable by others that are thinking about doing this program in their area. That's very important to us. We really feel that this is a valuable program, and we would like to see it taken on in other areas of the state. And that ties into my last point on this slide, which would be determining the optimum funding level and the return on investment. This program wasn't intended to go into perpetuity. We really view this more as an opportunity to evaluate whether a cost-sharing relationship with a private entity will result in accelerated adoption of a program that benefits a public good. We want to figure out what is that optimum level. Do we need to continue funding it through state grants, or is it more of just give it kind of a kick and producers eventually just take it on themselves because they recognize it's just good business to do this type of technology on their fields? We're not sure where that is yet. We want to answer that question. Before I wrap up, I just want to mention a couple things. The Watershed District this isn't the only program we do to work with agriculture. We do some other things, and they're on the left-hand side. I'll just hit a couple of them. We're just about to start an alternative tile intake project. We're actually going to try to work through the tilers and equip them so they go out and sell alternative tile intakes to the producers. Kind of like while we were trying to work with the cooperatives and have them sell the product, we want to work with the tilers. So we have a fair amount of open intakes still in our watershed, and there's pretty good technology now to remove those from the landscape while still maintaining the drainage. And the reason we want to get rid of open tile intakes as much as possible, because that's a direct connection in terms of sediment moving into the tile, and phosphorus connection by going to more of a dense pattern tile or a rock inlet. We're removing that connection. Doesn't necessarily address the nitrogen issue, but it really helps with the phosphorus issue. And then we do a series of buffers and the pretty standard typical fare you would expect from any government unit working with agriculture. And I also wanted to mention on the right side, sampling of programs targeting agriculture in Minnesota. We've already heard about one of them, FarmWise, and I believe the rest of this afternoon is going to be spent on the Agriculture Water Quality Certification Program. There's a couple other ones, and I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of them and take the time to look into that if this is something you're really interested in. Finally, just a couple quick acknowledgements. First would be the board chair, Robert Schiefelbein. He's the guy that came up with this idea. He's a farmer. And the Schiefelbein Agnes Farms is his outfit. And he's the one that came up with the idea and kind of led the push, helped get the pilot running. And so a big acknowledgement to him. Also the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. They're the ones that are funding this through the federal grant. Definitely have to mention the farmer cooperatives. Without them, this program wouldn't have worked. They're the ones, really the boots on the ground for us. Also want to mention Rebecca Cluckhone and Wes Bull from Wink Associates. They provide a lot of the scientific and technical expertise. They're helping with the data analysis, for example. And then last but not least, the citizens of the Clearwater River Watershed District. The grant does not cover all the cost. So the citizens are paying the rest of it through ad valorem taxes and special assessment. That's all I have. It looks like we don't really have any time for questions, so I'm just going to pop up my contact information. I apologize, I won't be here in the afternoon, so if you have any questions, by all means, email me, look up on our website. You can even Twitter if you're into that, and feel free to give me a call. I'll try to answer your questions the best I can. Thanks.